BookTube. I'm here today to do my weekly wrap-up of all the books I read for the last week for Nonfiction November. I read quite a bit of books. I read 10 books in total. A lot of that is due to having, the Thanksgiving holiday off. I had 4.5 days off. It's so sad. Like, today's Sunday, and even that dreaded Monday is just, but Christmas is just around the corner, so I'll have another break then, which will be nice. And it's interesting to read all this nonfiction, and then in December I'm switching to a lot of fiction books. So yeah, it's interesting, like switch a turn of events. But I decided not to do a December TBR just because I have an enormous TBR. Like, I went to the library over the weekend, and I was just looking for Christmas books. I was like looking for Christmas, anything with Christmas or December or holiday in the title. And so I just gathered up this huge bag full of books, and so I'm just gonna see what I can get to. So instead of doing a monthly TBR, I decided to do a weekly reads, because I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna be reading each week. And if I just did one video, it would be really long. And so yeah. Anyway, let's get into the books I read this previous week. The first one is The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells. Hopefully you can see that okay. And with the little dead bee on the cover. But this book, it was written very, very, very well. It's almost along the lines of the Carbon Ideologies. If anyone's read that, it was like volume 1 and volume 2. And in this one, it's all about climate change and what is going to happen, not just by the end of the century, but going forward. Like, he talks a lot about how a lot of the scientific measures and predictions are just until the new, going to 2100. But he talks about, that isn't when climate change is just going to stop. So he talks a lot about what's going to happen past that point. And of course, he talks a lot about, what the predictions different people have predicted is going to happen. And it doesn't just focus on the big things like the oceans, the seas rising, and things like that. He talks about, pandemics is in here. He talks about the ozone layers and pollution, and he talks about all sorts of things. I always feel like I had the book with me so I could quote it, but I had to go back to the library. But there was so many really good quotes in here. I feel like I'm not doing justice to it. But yeah, a lot of things you wouldn't think of that relate to climate change. Like, you think you're not going to be affected by this because you're living in a rich country like America, for example. But we will be affected, and he talks about how different countries are affected in different ways. So like India is going to be really hard hit, and islands and things like that. But and he also talks about how much pollution we put out in the air, and the ratio of okay, what is your return going to be on that? And so America is really interesting. The United States is interesting because the amount of bad harm that we've done, it's almost an equal ratio of the bad that we're going to get in return, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was a really interesting point that I hadn't really heard about. I know there's different regions. For example, in the West, there's going to be lots of wildfires. It's just going to keep ramping up, lots of droughts. And then in the South, there'll be a lot more flooding and major storms. And he talks about the ice melting and things like that. But it wasn't just focused on the ocean rising like some other climate change books would do. But yeah, if you're interested in the subject, I would highly recommend picking it up, because he also he interviews quite a few people, and he also references a lot of books that I've read in the past, like the Carbon Ideologies, and I can't remember the author's name. I should have written it down, but about the sea level rising. I can't remember the name of that. But anyway, yeah, he references quite a few books that I've read, current literature, not literature, but current books on the topic. I then read a book thanks to BookTube. Lukash from Total Pretentious and one other channel was mentioning this book. I can't remember who the other person was, but it's Richard Dawkins' The Ancestor's Tale, A Pilgrimage to the Dawn of Evolution. And I thought this would be a good kind of a companion to reading Charles Darwin's book on the origin of species, and so this is more. Like I mentioned when I read that one, I wanted a lot of that information is outdated. We've discovered a lot more, and so this is kind of what I had in mind. And Dawkins takes an interesting way of telling the story of evolution. So instead of going from the past to current day, he decides to go from current day and goes backwards. And so he makes a point that how animals are today, like their current state, wasn't like fate. It wasn't like we didn't slowly evolve to get to this point. Like, and so that was an interesting way of telling the story. And so he each like point he makes of like how each like a gene is connected. And so like he goes like from humans, and then he goes to our closest relative and where that split off. And then he's going back to where we were different species were connected, and then they branched off, which I thought was a very interesting way of doing it. And so yeah, this was same with the climate change book. If you're interested in reading my evolution, then yeah, this one was a really good one. I then finally finished a book I've been working on slowly but surely. This is The Portable 19th Century African-American Women Writers. This was like a Penguin Black classic, and this featured many writers, including some that are more well-known, but then there was a lot of obscure ones that maybe were known in the past, but have kind of like faded out. And so I really was happy to pick this up because I think Penguin did a really good job. The editors did a really good job of selecting a well-rounded work. So yeah, I don't really have much to say about this. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It talked about all sorts of things. It had like African American fiction writing and poetry, and their like plays on slavery, and then it also had some of their speeches that they were doing in front of not only like people in their society group with other African Americans, but also speeches that was done abroad and in front of other people. So that was really cool. And then it also just had like their kind of like anthems, like Sojourner Truth. It had her famous speech, but it also had like different interpretations of it. Like people who were there, like they like, and then someone who had written her speech like years later. Like there are two different takes on it. Like, and so it's kind of like that game of like that telephone game where you're telling, you tell someone whatever sentence, and then they have to go around, and then like the last person. It's kind of can be totally different from that one. And so like the interpretation of like the later speech was a lot different than what she was maybe actually saying. So yeah, this was, if you're interested in learning about slavery or like the movement of them becoming free, and how that affected all sorts of like socioeconomic and economic statuses. So it had like people who were very poor. Then it also had some of the wealthier people, and then also people who had escaped to Canada, and it wasn't just like one region. And so yeah, this was very good. I then read a book that I was kind of disappointed in, just because. So this is Penguin the Magpie, The Odd Little Bird Who Saved a Family by Cameron Bloom and Bradley Trevor Grieve. And I thought the reason I was disappointed with it, because I thought it would feature a lot more about the magpie penguin, and it did mention them, but I think it was more of telling, not showing. The story was really good. It just wasn't exactly what I was expecting going in. It's about a couple, and they met in college, and they're very outgoing, and they travel all over the world, and are really into hiking and just being very outdoorsy. And then something happens where the wife just happens to lean against like a unsturdy fence, and then she falls and really severely injures herself. My dog was sitting beside me. Injures herself, and so their whole life changes. And so she's completely debilitated. She can't do anything. She's paralyzed from her shoulders down. And so for someone who's very active, this was really extra devastating, if that's even, I don't know, possible. But and so she's contemplating suicide, and even her husband's like, I love you, I want you to stay. And so, but in walks in this magpie who it kind of changes their life, and it makes her realize there's more to live for, and she can find joy. Outside of being able to walk or run or do a sport, but she actually was able. Oh, my dog is like hitting the recliner here. But she is actually able to do a sport later on. But yeah, anyway, so I was thinking it would be a lot more about focusing on Penguin the magpie, but it isn't. It's more about the wife's journey of being rehabilitated, like mentally and physically. So yeah, for that it was really good. But it was sorry, my dog's like right here. He's leaning against the recliner. But yeah, he's really cute. Man, turn his face so you can see him. Maybe not. He's like facing right. He can't really turn around at this point. But yeah, so those are the ebooks I read, and then I finished up a bunch of physical books that I had on my TBR. So the first one is The Bat in My Pocket: A Memorable Friendship by Amanda Lowler, and this is more of like an essay. It's like I don't know, like less than 100 pages, 83 pages. And, oh, sorry, I hope that doesn't make you sick. He's going to lay down now, so hopefully he won't be jarring it anymore. So this is about a woman who had never had really any experience with bats, but she goes to her shop one day to open up the store, and so she sees a little bat on the concrete, and so she thinks it's dead, and so she picks it up and puts it in a little shaded spot off from the hot pavement. And she thinks it's going to die, and so she comes later that afternoon and sees it's still living, so she gives it some water, and then she leaves it, and then she comes back and it's still living, and so she decides, okay, well, maybe there's some life in them, and so she takes it home, and so she's trying to, this is before, the internet, and so she doesn't really have any information on how to care for bats, and so she contacts, the local, bat center, and so she gets, little pamphlets, and she figures out what to do, and she comes to really care for this bat, and she names it's Sunshine, and then she eventually has a companion. I was going to show you some drawings. It's yawning. She eventually finds a companion called BB. There's any more pictures. Each little chapter has a little drawing there. But yeah, I learned a lot about bats through this. I didn't realize how small they were. They were just like an inch or two long, except for their wings, and so a lot of her stories is about just kind of learning through error. She was feeding them. She was learning what they ate, and of course they eat insects. Everyone knows they're really good for keeping mosquitoes down. But she was feeding them fruit, and come to find out that's actually not good for bats too, because some bats are fruit eaters and some are insect eaters. And I guess for she had a Mexican was it Mexican short-tailed bat, I think was what it's called. And come to find out, if you feed them fruit, that's really not good for them. And so she didn't know until later down the road. And so and also some of them they got injured. And so how do you take she took her to a vet to figure out. And some of them turned her down. And so she was calling around to find someone who was able to take care of the bats. So yeah, overall, this was really informative. It was really short, and yeah, I really liked it. I then read a much bigger book. This is This Hallowed Ground: The Story of the Union Side of the Civil War by Bruce Catton. And here he is on the back here. This is a really old edition. There's maps, and this is all about the Union, like I said, the Union side of the Civil War. And the writing is just phenomenal. I'm not a person who tabs up books, but if I did, this one would be. I think my dog is breathing, and so I think he's slowly moving the camera. Oh, I hope this is okay. But I'll keep my hand here just to keep it steady, or maybe I can move him. 1 second, let me see, because I don't want anyone getting sick. Because I know I would if it was moving like that. Okay, he's back up again. But yeah, but if I wasn't who would tab this, I would have it almost every single page. This was just great. It's one volume on the Civil War. It is in a series, and so I think if someone's interested in the Civil War, this one would be. Oh, he's moving it again. Let's see, Tucker, come on, move away. Oh, I know he doesn't want to move. Oh boy. Okay, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, if you're interested in reading a one-volume book, then yeah, this one can't go wrong. I then finished up another book that I've been slowly reading throughout the month. This is The Best American Science and Nature Writing by Cy Montgomery. This is a 2019 edition. And it said all sorts of things. It had like nature writing, it had biology, it had astrology. I mean, astronomy, and it had like pandemics. It had things that, like, about birth rates. Like the last one stuck out at me because it was about how African American women are have really a higher percentage of them have babies who have a high mortality rate. And so, why is that? And they also have a lot more complications after pregnancy. And so, why is that? We're in a developed age. And so even for African American women who have like a college degree, like you think, okay, they're not, teenagers having children, they're educated, they have, supposedly, yeah, that means they may not have more money, but even like that status is more inclined to have problems with their babies than the teenagers. So that was really interesting. So yeah, this is like full of really interesting essays collected from like the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Scientific American, the New York Times Magazine. So all sorts of sources in here. And then in the back, it gives you like a huge list, a long list of things that weren't included. So if you're interested in, reading about, like, it just gives you a brief, like the title, the author, and where it came from. So if you want to discover more that didn't make it into this book, then yeah, there was that information as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm going to go back and read the 2018 version. And yeah, so this was great. I then read a reread for me. I'd rather be reading The Delights and Dilemmas of the Reading Life by Anne Bogle. And hopefully you can see that the light's like, it's really dark outside. It's been raining like all weekend. So yeah, hopefully you can see it with the, no, like that. Okay, you can see it like like this. But yeah, this is a really, really short book. Like I think it's like 50 or 60 pages. And it's, I like it because each chapter started out, before she got into the topic, was my dog's leaning. Hopefully he's not moving the camera again. Oh gosh. But yeah, each chapter started out with like different quotes, like of different circumstances that book people can get into, like oh, you just started your book, and if you're on an e-reader, your Kindle just died, or you're in the middle of a really good scene and your Kindle just died. So that hit me because I read mostly on a Kindle. And so yeah, I can identify with this. Or like, oh, you have to plug it in, or or different situations where it's not the best time for your Kindle to die. And then other things like the library book, like you have a lot of overdues at your library because you can't return the book until it's returned, and different things like that. Like maybe I can just like go to a page and I can quote some of them. She gives like a little list, like Number 2, you're a book lover. You don't have enough shelves to begin with. Ignore the decorators. Let's find another short one. Cold duplicates. If you have 2 copies of a book, keep the prettier one. So there's just different little like sentences all about collecting, owning books, libraries, and yeah, it's just about also her journey with books. She talks about the books she had as a child, and how her mother was a product of libraries, and then her father grew up going to bookstores, and so how she kind of embodied both of their book habits in a way. And so yeah, this is just a great story, a great like a memoir in a way, and also a book about books. So yeah, I love those. And so if any of you are bookish people like I am, then yeah, this was a fun read. I then read, sorry, we're getting to the end. I read 10 books. It was a lot. Moonbound, Apollo 11, and the Dream of Spaceflight by Jonathan Feder-Vorm. And this was just great. He not only talked about, give me some pictures here, about the Apollo 11 journey, but he also talked about like the history of spaceflight and why we went there. And of course he talks a lot about the USSR and the Cold War. And so the ones that are in like full color are the parts where he's talking about the Apollo 11 flight, and then the ones that are just like this one color, like this yellow, black, and like the blue, there's like one solid tone for each chapter. That is when he's talking about history, like anything previous to like the current Apollo 11 flight. So yeah, this was if you want like a quick story on information about the moon and astronomy, then yeah, this one is really good, and it's a fun way instead of like reading a book. A graphic novel is a great way to do that. And then the last book I read for Nonfiction November is Nature's Giants: The Biology and Evolution of the World's Largest Life Forms by Graham R. Ruxton. So here's that one, and so you have a T-Rex, and then you have a giraffe, and it's done in chapters. So he talks about birds, and then there's dinosaurs, and it's all about like each animal he's focusing on. He's talking about what are the extinct versions of this animal, and then also what are like the current giants. So he talks about like whales and birds and insects. The insects were gruesome. I couldn't really dwell too long on that because that was just a bit too much for me. But some of them, dragonflies, okay, I could do that. But the spiders or the snakes, yeah, no, that was a bit rough for me to read. But this was fun because it had a lot of pictures and the writing was really good. And so, yeah, this was a nice way to read kind of like a dinosaur / biology book. So yeah, this was good. So these are all the books I read this past week. I had a really good reading week. Hopefully I didn't get too sick with the moving camera. I'll make sure next time that my dog isn't leaning against the recliner, so he's not, moving it so much. But yeah, I hope everyone had a really good Thanksgiving week. If you're celebrating Thanksgiving or Black Friday or whatever. I mentioned on my Friday reads, I did not participate in any Black Friday thing. I had a really low-key weekend here, reading, and yeah, just enjoying the time off, not having to go anywhere, which is just my favorite thing. But yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, BookTube.